Welcome, everyone. My name is Melanie McGackin, and I'm excited to host today's Sharing Possibilities in Community Living Learning event on behalf of the Rutgers Community Living Education Project. The Rutgers Community Living Education Project, also known as CLEP, is a program through the Rutgers School of Public Health. The CLEP team can serve as a bridge for self-advocates and for families whose loved ones are ready to explore community residential options. CLEP is committed to providing individual guidance, mentoring, and education surrounding community living resources for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Today's presentation, Don't Get Lost in Transition, is being presented in collaboration with Dani Evans, representing the Ivymount School, and Kate Smidl, representing the Kennedy Krieger Institute. Before we get started, I want to share how you can best participate in today's learning event. To ensure the highest sound quality possible, all attendees will be muted during today's webinar. We do, however, like to keep these sessions interactive. So to ask your questions to the host or presenter, please use a Q&A option on your screen. If you would like to unmute to ask your question live, please just send a message using the chat feature, and we will make sure to unmute your microphone during your turn. Topic-specific questions will be addressed as long as time allows, and for consideration to all of our attendees, we encourage you to keep questions as general as possible. At this time, I would like to welcome today's presenters, Dani Evans and Kate Smidl. Dani, Kate, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mel. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our presentation, Don't Get Lost in Transition. Thank you for attending. We really appreciate it, and we're excited to share information on this topic with you. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I work at the Ivymount School. It's in Rockville, Maryland. I've worked there for about 13 years now, and I'm a speech-language pathologist. I originally developed the tool that we're going to be talking about today in 2014. But it's always a work in progress. So we've made a lot of updates with my colleague, Ann Kern, starting then, but it's always a work in progress. We're continuing to make it even better. Some of my interests include using assistive technology and all of the possibilities that it offers to support communication, transition, and self-advocacy. And then I'm also a co-author on our 4 published articles related to the tool that we're going to talk about today. And I presented at different local and national conferences. I also live in New Jersey, and I'm from New Jersey originally, and I work remotely at Ivymount, but I'm on site sometimes too.
All right, and I'll introduce myself. My name is Kate Smidl, and I'm a speech-language pathologist at Kennedy Krieger Institute in Baltimore. I work in our outpatient speech and language clinic and also our inpatient neurobehavioral unit, which supports children and adults with severe behavioral needs. My interests include supporting functional communication and self-advocacy through technology and assessment and treatment of fluency and social communication disorders.
So just to tell you a little bit more about our programs, Ivymount is in Rockville, Maryland, and it's a non-public school for neurodiverse individuals ages 4 to 21. We have a lot of different programs with a lot of students with different strengths and needs, some related to communication, related to behavior, with options for a certificate or a diploma track. And a big focus of all of our school programs is working as an interdisciplinary team. And I primarily work with the transition to age students at Ivymount.
And like I said before, Kennedy Krieger has an inpatient neurobehavioral unit located in Baltimore. It is an average admission length of 4 to 6 months that aims to evaluate and treat children and young adults with developmental and intellectual disabilities and severe problem behavior.
So today we're just going to share some different ways that we feel like a This Is Me story might benefit individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So that may be someone you're working with. You might be a caregiver, and this could be your son or daughter. If you work in more of an educational setting, it could be a student that you're working with. And we're going to talk about a few different settings for working on these stories and sharing them. We're going to share the information that's in a This Is Me story and how you can customize it to best represent the individual that you're working with. We are going to describe different strategies for teaching individuals how to share their stories, and also talk about the different ways caregivers and team members can support individuals during different transitional periods, and why advocacy tools can be helpful for these situations. So I'm going to start with some background on transition and tools to support self-advocacy. And in our presentation today, we're going to use the definition of transition pretty loosely. I feel like traditionally you kind of hear it as a student moving from, Ivymount out to adult services or from one program to another program, but we're really talking about any change in environment or communication partner. We all have these different mini transitions that happen throughout the day. So it can be from school to home, to a new service provider, a less or more restrictive environment within a school program. So in that way, we feel like this tool can be used to support many different transitions versus just kind of the big ones. So why do we need tools to support transitions, and why is this important? We want the individuals that we're working with to self-advocate and be able to share information with people they're working with to facilitate positive relationships and also to get their needs met so that they can be successful in these new environments. We also want to be inclusive. So we know a lot of the communication partners with that are students or the people that we know are interacting with a lot of novel people in the community once maybe they graduate or move on for those big transitions. And a lot of those people maybe don't have a lot of experience adjusting their communication style and interactions to work with somebody that's neurodiverse. And also the burden of working in those new environments shouldn't all be on the individuals to change their communication style to fit in our individuals. So the idea is that we're teaching communication partners how they can best interact and support our students by making some pretty, easy changes, things that we do all the time, like reduce speaking rate, talk about topics that might be interesting to the individual working in that environment. We also want to support communication during these transitions. So I work with a lot of individuals that have speech and language challenges or needs, and they do need support with that. And they may have a lot of information to share with new people that they're working with or interacting with, but they might need some help doing that. And also finally, to improve self-determination. So we're hoping for our individuals that they will have a great quality of life going forward. And those self-determination and self-advocacy skills are really important for post-school success. So we're thinking about all of these things when we are thinking about supporting our students that are transition age or clients. So what is a This Is Me story? I'm going to share what it is with you, but then also show you an example because I think it's easier to kind of understand the concept of it looking at an example versus hearing about it. So what's critical is that it's personalized. It's a digital self-advocacy tool to support individuals during transitional periods. So when we first started working on the This Is Me stories, we were calling them communication stories because as an SLP, I made them super communication focused. But over time, with interactions with different families and seeing our students move through the process from our school to adult services, we realized it would actually be a more helpful tool if it was more holistic and included all of this different information about the individuals, like their interests and preferences to share with somebody new. Any medical information that might be key for somebody to hear about, different strategies to support their language across the board, behavioral needs and supports, which Kate will talk a lot about too. Basically, any of this information that you feel like it might be a priority for someone to learn about the individual that you're working with. The goal is that we're helping these individuals share their unique skill set, strengths, and interests, as well as advocating for communication and behavioral supports and strategies to promote inclusive environments and interactions with novel communication partners. So we want this story to represent all the amazing things that the students, for example, at Ivymount can do, and that they can show different people that they're interacting with once they leave. And we keep saying all the different people in a work setting, but it could be other family members. People have shared that sharing these stories with like medical professionals has been helpful. So there are a lot of different ways that this story can support different individuals in different environments. So first, I'm going to share a scenario. It's not specific to the students' videos that you're going to see in the story, but I think it's an example that might resonate with some people that have had students out at job sites or at first work experiences. It was the student's first day of work at a pharmacy. Their job was to take inventory of the candy. Their supervisor verbally explained the task, and when asked if they were ready, the student said yes. Their supervisor gave them the inventory papers and walked away. When the supervisor came back 15 minutes later to check on the student's progress, they had not started their work. So looking at this scenario, I think everyone can agree that there are some different communication breakdowns occurring. So some things that the supervisor possibly could have done differently were they maybe could have modeled the task that they were expecting the student to do. They could have checked with the student by asking, oh, can you explain the task back to me? Kind of like a comprehension check. Or they might have provided a checklist so the student could see each step in the process for doing this job. And on the other end for the student, they might have been able to advocate at school with someone more familiar saying like, oh, I didn't understand that, I need help with that. But with someone that was a little bit more novel, they might not have been able to do that in the moment or felt like they could. So basically, I feel like this is a common scenario that people might see, and we were seeing it with different students at different job sites, just these different breakdowns occurring. And communication is a two-way street. So we were hoping to come up with a tool that could kind of address some of these breakdowns that were occurring by providing strategies for everyone involved in the interaction. So this is one of my students that have graduated. This is me stories. And I just want you to be able to see what a story looks like. It is his whole story, but I'm going to show probably just one or two sections for the sake of time.
Brandon, so this is me story. Can I tell you about myself? How to talk to me. Give me time to think after giving me a direction or asking a question. Ask me to repeat your direction out loud to make sure I understand what to do.
Okay, Brandon, I would like you to do the station setup. What would I like you to do?
Station setup.
Great.
How I interact. I am learning to use strategies to gain people's attention. I might need reminders to wait until a person is looking at me before I talk. Visuals help me remember how to respond to interruptions. Please use this visual to remind me of the steps. Sometimes I get distracted from the job I'm doing. Please remind me to keep working on my task. Speaking up for myself. I work best when you show me a model of what my finished work looks like. Brand.
So I'm going to stop the story there for now because Kate is going to share a lot of different examples for the different sections that you saw in the story. But basically you can see there are some pictures, there are some videos representing the strategies on the pages. The videos and pictures are of the student or the individual in the environments that they've chosen. And it represents information that somebody new working with that student would be helpful for them in working with them as well. So just talking about the tool foundations, it was really important to us that we were helping our students self-advocate for their own needs as independently as possible. So we were seeing at different job sites a lot of conversations about the student when they were standing there versus the student being kind of the driver of these conversations about what would support them at work. So by developing this tool with the students, we were kind of hoping to take the middleman or support person out of the interaction and bringing it back to between the person that was interacting with that student, like a supervisor or a coworker, for example. We also wanted to teach communication partners how they could adapt their own style of communication to fit the individual's learning needs. Lots of different things communication partners can do to make the environment easier to communicate in. They can reduce their rate of speech, use less words if they need to, provide visuals. And a lot of communication partners were willing to do this. They just needed more support in figuring out how to do this. So this was a quote from one of our research studies. We did do some interviews with different job site supervisors. And this particular supervisor said, the story made me more aware when asking detailed questions. Did he understand? Am I asking too many questions, bombarding him with information? I learned the time he needs for processing. It's not because he didn't hear, it's that he needs the time to understand, which is really critical for someone working with one of our students to know and understand that our students might need extra time to process information. And once they process that information, they can be just as successful with any of the job tasks or conversations or anything in that interaction as somebody else. We also wanted there to be a comprehensive transfer of information between the individual and a new communication partner. So we wanted to find a way to kind of create a snapshot of the student. None of the stories you'll find are more than 10 minutes long. And we were finding that as our students were transitioning, they had reports that were going with them. Some of them were very lengthy, had a ton of information in them about all of these different areas. But some of the strategies that were represented in these stories were either really difficult to picture. So that's where the picture video comes in to help somebody see that strategy in action. Or, people just didn't have the time or capacity to read through all of that information. So it resulted in more of a learning curve to kind of get to know that student and start working with them because they didn't have the opportunity to see all of the information that, traveled with that student or that client from one environment to another. And this is a quote from one of Kate's parents. So Kate, if you want to share this.
Sure. So this was a patient who was discharging from our unit and transitioning back into the home environment, and he had all new in-home staff coming to work with him. And so the parent used the advocacy video, showed it to him, and he said that this was the most helpful tool he's ever had to get familiar with a new client, which I think speaks volumes to the power of these videos and how they support families and individuals who are using them.
And then finally, we wanted to capitalize on assistive technologies that many people already use. So I know I rely pretty heavily on my own iDevice to get through the day. I set an alarm, I use Google Maps, I make lists. And our students also, a lot of them already used iDevices for leisure, for pictures, all of the things that we use them for too. And, our students potentially don't want to stick out when they're using these strategies that support them in novel environments. So we wanted to use the technology that our students were already using and find a way to fit this kind of tool that we were discussing into something that was portable, maybe discreet, and something that they felt comfortable using already. A lot of our students were also using story creation apps already to support expressive language. So we were making different stories about the language that they, with the language that they use for their different tasks at work, or different stories about preferences. So we knew that a lot of them felt really comfortable with this kind of like modality already. So we wanted to, keep using something that they felt comfortable with. So next, I'm just going to talk with you about how you can develop the story from start to finish. I'm hoping you're going to be able to leave here today between our presentation and the link to the how-to guide that I did send in the chat at the beginning of the presentation, being able to create one of these stories without support. You should have all the information that you need, but also I am always happy to help get people started in the process. And I know Kate probably is too. So if you feel like you want to reach out to either of us with additional questions or support for kind of getting things going or to brainstorm, we're both happy to do that. So this is our interactive online how-to guide, and the link for it is in the PowerPoint as well. It's a free resource, everything available in it you can download and use right away. You do have to initially create a login to access it, but it's free. So this will have all of the steps for creating the story along with all of the different resources that we're going to discuss in the next couple of sections. Also a side note, my colleague Ann and I are working on updating the modules that Kate is going to talk about in a little bit. So as we know, the world of education and working with individuals with disabilities is always changing and evolving and growing. So we originally wrote some of the scripts and strategies included several years ago. So we know that some of the information is in need of a facelift for sure, and that is a work in progress. So first, you want to establish that the person that you're working with is a candidate for this tool. And again, kind of like our definition of transition, we feel like it could be a good fit for most people. We like to, at least in the school setting, prioritize individuals nearing transitional periods. So for our graduates, maybe we know that they're leaving Ivymount soon. We also want to discuss creating this tool with families and caregivers, unless you're the family member or caregiver that's helping your individual create one. But we know that families and caregivers are going to be critical and kind of at the center of this process with their son or daughter. So we want them, involved from start to finish, providing input on the scripts, input on the information, and then also kind of being at the forefront of helping their young adult or son or daughter share this information in different settings. We also want to include the individual that the story is about in creating the scripts and different things in the story. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later too. We want to always include all of the team members in addition to the family and the individual that the story is about. We work at Ivymount closely with mental health providers, the students' educational team. Our students go out to job sites, so they're job coaches. Each of those providers has a unique lens on the student and unique information about what strategies might really support that student in different settings, so that we really get that holistic, big picture story that really represents that student best. And then we also, we know that this may be time consuming, especially as you first start making them, to kind of like develop your first one. It can take a long time. So to kind of capture that time, we do include creating and sharing the story as an IEP goal, either in the communication section or transition section. So it legally has to be worked on and created, and that it's right there. So you have the time to work on this because it is really important. Next, you're going to select the format for what you'll use to create the story. So we typically like an application where you can embed picture and video, because those picture and video strategies are really important. Being able to pair text with that. Voice recording is really important too. I know you heard Brandon's voice in the story, and it really makes them feel personal. Something that's easy to program and easy to navigate for you creating the story, but also for the individual to share the story. Something that's relatively affordable is also really important. We want this tool to be able to be created for as many individuals as possible, and we don't want costs necessarily to be an access point or an access issue. So we've also talked on the next page about different ways to kind of adapt the format of the story depending on your individual. And also it's compatible with those everyday devices that we were talking about. So Pictello, I don't know if anyone's familiar with it or has used it before, is the app that we typically, or not typically, but we've used the most over time. It's actually developed by the same company that makes Proloquo to go. So it's updated pretty frequently because that's kind of one of the main speech generating programs that's currently on the market. But Kate and her colleague Dawn, also and all of us have also either used Google Slides or PowerPoint, and you can have a digital copy there or a hard copy if maybe a student has some issues with using technology. Maybe a hard copy would work better for them to share the information. We also have made the stories in Pictello, but then done a screen recording and then saved it to the student's camera roll so they can access it that way. Versus within the app itself. Or you can also upload Google Slides, PowerPoint slides, or PDF pages into iMovie, which is a similar idea to screen recording, to create a video file to share that story. So there's pros and cons to using all of these different methods. But what is nice about technology lately is with most of these, you can also share the story in advance. So maybe you know that the person you're working with is going to be starting a new job site. And if the individual agrees that you can share this information with somebody new that they're going to be working with, maybe that supervisor views the story before they've even met the individual. So they kind of have that background knowledge before the individual shares it with them too. So it kind of gives you like a picture of that person before the first interaction happens, is another way that we've shared them too. So this is included in the how-to guide, but this is just the planning guide draft. For me, when I'm making the stories, I often am making them for many different students at once. So I like to kind of draft the entire thing before I get started and talk about the strategies and scripts with the entire team and finalize them in this document before I start digitally creating the story, if that's the format that I choose to make it with that family. So it has the strategy script that you would include for the page, if the text is entered, if the audio is recorded, if the picture or video example is taken, and what that plan is for the video or picture. So now Kate is going to talk about the different modules or the different story sections.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about what we typically include in the video. These are the different modules or chapters of each video. The video typically starts with an introduction section where the individual introduces themselves, and then we flow into an about me section where they might share information about their interests, their work preferences. We might share information about medical information or diagnoses, accommodations they might require. We then move into the receptive language section, so how to talk to me. We'll then talk about the expressive language, how the individual will talk to you. Their pragmatic language skills, or how they like to interact socially. We address self-advocacy skills, such as how I speak up for myself. You saw that in the student video example that Dani shared earlier. The executive functioning section, or tools to help me remember, and then information about their behavior if that's applicable. So my students, because they all have severe behavioral needs, have a behavior plan. They might have protective equipment or emotional regulation and coping strategies that we feel is important to include in their story. And then we conclude it. So we'll go into this in a little bit more in depth. When you're considering what to include in the modules, it's important to prioritize and be conscious of the story's length. Typically, that 5 to 8 minute range is kind of the sweet spot that we try to aim for, but we do want to include strategies that are applicable across many communication partners and many contexts, so we get the most bang for our buck. We include strategies that are part of the individual's toolkit, so we're using including strategies that they have learned and practiced and can explain to other people. And we want to use scripts that reflect their language, their comprehension level, and their interests. So when we use this language and terminology, we want to use the words that the individual knows and prefers. So whether they refer to their self-care routine, or they want to take a break, they want to go relax, we want to include that language because the story is being told from their perspective. So we want it to encompass them. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about the modules. The first module we start with is the About Me module. And as we said, this will include general information about the individual. We want to include their hobbies, their interests, their preferred leisure activities, topics of conversation that most interest them or excite them. We want to give a little bit of information about their strengths. We might want to include their work preferences or their work history so that job site supervisor knows what they're already comfortable with. We might include information about their vision, mobility, or hearing status if that's applicable, and then as well as information about their medical or behavioral diagnoses. And we understand that this information can be sensitive and not all families or individuals might want to disclose that information. And so we work together with the individual and the family to make sure we're including information that is important to them and also relevant to the reason we're making the story. This is the planning guide About Me module. So for each module, there's an About Me, or there is a planning guide that you can go through and fill out that's available on the link we shared. This is an example of an interest page. So this individual student liked to talk about antique shopping and watching YouTube videos. And so we have a picture of one of their favorite antique shops.
Mm-hmm. And for this particular student, what was really nice about his story, and this was happening with other student stories too, is that the pictures or these scripts would start like an additional discussion about like, where do you like to go antique shopping? What do you like to look for when you go antique shopping? So even though this information is important to have, it's also kind of a jump start to establishing rapport with the individual and the person that they're interacting with. This was another, oh, I'm sorry, Kate.
Nope, go ahead.
This was a work preferences page. So we always like to include the environments that our students enjoy working in. So this particular student really enjoyed jobs that had cleaning and data entry. So he wanted a picture of himself doing data entry for this page in his story.
This is a slide a little bit about the students' medical information and diagnoses. This is really important for the kids that I treat because a lot of them have complex medical needs or developmental disabilities that impact their behavior and learning. And so one of our patients had type 1 diabetes that was really often in fluctuation, and he was often asymptomatic. And so it was important for his future nurses to know this information. And then we had another student working on self-advocacy of his autism and intellectual disability diagnosis. And we explained, this means I learn differently, but I still have a lot of strengths. And this is some of the self-advocacy work that we did together in therapy that he wanted to include in his story because he was really proud of it.
Again, this student, he wears glasses to help him see. So it was important that people knew to use large text for any visuals for him so that he was able to access those visuals and they would actually support him. This particular student also didn't always bring his glasses to school. So the visual kind of served as a reminder that he did have them and that they could help him when he was doing different job tasks or in different environments.
So now we'll move into the how to talk to me section. So this is reflecting the individual's receptive language skills. In this chapter, instead of going through and really just explaining the comprehension skills of the individual like a report might do, we really want to focus it on the interaction with the communication partner. So we're teaching the communication partner how to simplify their language, how to adjust their speaking rate or tone, how to gain their attention before speaking to them, how to utilize visuals and written supports to support their participation, how to pair models with verbal language, and how to provide feedback. So it's less about this is what the individual comprehends and more about this is how you can support their comprehension to ensure that they're being as successful as possible.
So this was one of my previous students, at our school, and he often needed a lot of processing time when he was given verbal information before he was able to answer the question. So here is an example of.
I often will answer the question correctly if given plenty of time.
George.
Yes, ma'am.
What did you do over the weekends?
Can you give me a minute?
Mm-hmm.
Last weekend I relaxed at home and I went to church.
Awesome.
So in maybe a typical job setting or a communication interaction, somebody might not think to say, hey, wow, 5 to 10 or 15 seconds feels like a really long time, but it is really critical for this individual to have that much time to think about what I've said. And I also really love how he uses his gesture and words to ask for more time. A student may not be able to do that. So it is really important to have a page like this in their story to know that I'm not ignoring you. I just need a little bit more time to think about what you've said.
Give me time.
This is just an example of a checklist that a student used. So the strategy is give me a checklist with up to 7 familiar words per step. We know that checklists can look really different across the different students and different job sites. So maybe a student might have only words on their checklist, or maybe they might have 2 words per step and a picture, or they may have a visual only checklist. So what we like to do is to just take a picture of a checklist that works well for them and have that example embedded right in the story. So somebody new working with them might be able to pick up that picture and see it and say, oh, I'm going to make them a checklist for their job task here, or a daily living routine that they have to do here that they have already successfully used for something else.
We also include how to use visual supports. And so this page is modeling how you can support an individual with gesture use. And if the person has a communication device, how you can model language on their communication system. We also like to include information about nonverbal communication, and the modules are very flexible. Some people prefer to include this in the pragmatic language section. Some people prefer to include this in how to talk to me. But something about, if the individual has difficulty interpreting nonverbal communication, if they have difficulty reading and integrating body language, facial expressions. And so we've included this picture of emojis because this student loved emojis, but it was helpful when you told them exactly how you were feeling instead of having them kind of read those cues themselves. And this student was very particular about how they received feedback. And so they included this script about how they're learning and practicing accepting feedback about their work. And the script that worked best for them was everyone makes mistakes. So the supervisor would say something positive. And next time, this would be a better way for me to handle that. And so this will just support ongoing relationships moving forward without trying to have to troubleshoot all of that. So now we're going to move into the how I talk to you or expressive language section. So this will include information about the individual's primary communication modality, whether that be verbal communication, a communication device, or a combination. We'll talk about intelligibility and communication repair strategies for those it is meaningful for, ways that an individual formulates and uses language, maybe some word retrieval strategies that they might need to use, or language organization strategies. So this is an example page from a student who had a speech sound disorder. It was sometimes difficult to understand his speech, and he had a communication book that he carried around to help repair those breakdowns. So this page just simply explains that he has difficulty being understood, and when you don't understand him, that you can prompt him to show you what he's talking about in his communication book.
This was a student that used a speech generating device. So he did use some vocal speech, but his vocal approximations could sometimes be very quiet or low volume. So he had a speech generating program to either clarify those words or to generate additional language. And the page is really specific. It's like I use Proloquo to go. So the icon is an owl. Here's what my home screen looks like. So someone could look at it and kind of see what language the student had that was available on their speech generating program.
And also what kind of visual symbols the individual is familiar with. So now we'll move into the how I interact or pragmatic language section. This will highlight the individual's social language strengths and information about their preferences or topics of conversation, verbal and nonverbal ways they initiate communication with others, and strategies to share information about their pragmatic language needs.
So this was a student that uses pictures and stories on his phone to talk about himself. So he was great at opening his camera roll and finding different things and sharing them with other people. There's actually a video example of him doing this as well. He was an excellent artist and made this amazing painting of the students arriving at Hogwarts from one of the Harry Potter movies. And he wanted this picture to be included on this page in his story. This was the same student, and one of his strategies was using different sentence starters and question starters to help him start conversations. It's a little bit hard to see in this video, but there is a whiteboard that has those sentence starters and question starters for this interaction that's pictured.
Sentence starters and question starters help me start conversations. Have you heard about Swiftness? I have not. That's a brand of a hot chocolate. Oh yes, I have heard about that. Nice. You can see those melted marshmallows. Yes, that looks so delicious.
So just in case you couldn't hear, he asked his communication partner if she's heard of Swiss Miss, which if you aren't as familiar with hot chocolate, you may not know what he meant right away. But he did initiate the interaction with a question. And then he was also able to clarify by finding a picture of Swiss Miss and then talking a little bit more about it and sharing more detail on this page.
We have some information about nonverbal communication and body language. So if some of our individuals have difficulty with personal space and they might get into your personal space. And so this is just a page explaining that I sometimes stand too close to people. If you need more space, you can remind me or you can take a step back. Kind of giving permission to talk about some of these social differences.
Mm-hmm. And I think going along with this, Kate, is sometimes the opposite is true, where they may need a lot of personal space, like you are too close to me. So it's a way to kind of advocate for that as well.
So now we'll move into the self-advocacy section, or speaking up for myself. And so this module is really highlighting how the individual will advocate for themselves, how they ask for supports, do they need reminders to use their supports, and then any information about accommodations that they might need to support their performance and participation.
So this is a video of a student that he liked to try solving problems on his own first. So he didn't want somebody to step in right away. He needed time to kind of figure things out. But then that he was also working on asking for help when he needs it.
I like to solve problems on my own. I'm working on asking for help when I need it. Hey, Miss Dolphin, can I have some help logging in?
Of course, George.
So it showed how he liked to try and wanted to try and solve that problem on his own for a few times. And then when he realized he would need some additional assistance, he gained the attention of his communication partner and asked for it. And also it shows that he can sometimes ask for really specific assistance, which is good to know about somebody too.
For individuals who have a communication device or have a communication modality other than verbal speech, they might have a help message or some sort of message in their device, but sometimes they'll need help initiating that or reminders that they're able to ask for help. And so this individual had a page about how she's likely to need that prompt, but more likely to just give you what she needs help with. And that's her way of initiating this request. So we'll go through briefly tools to help me remember, or executive functioning strategies. These are simply supporting tools that we all use in our everyday lives and our individuals also benefit from. So different technology tools and, physical paper reminders as well. We've got some examples about use of alarms, use of checklists, which we've already talked about. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about behavioral needs and supports. This is really relevant, like I said, for the individuals I serve. And so they'll often have very lengthy and in-depth behavior plans, but what we want to do is include just the important tidbits from that for individuals working with them. So we'll include their behavioral presentation, that important information, and then include visual representations of their treatment materials and what you, as a communication partner, as a caregiver, as a person, interacting with them, what you can do when they do have behavior. And so
this was, sorry, Kate, this was one of my students. Yeah. That taking a short break helps him. I like to listen to music for 2 to 3 minutes before getting back to work. Remind me to set a timer for my break. So it shows somebody the way that he lets them know that he needs a little bit of time and what he likes to do during that time before he's ready to work or, rejoin class again.
This is information from one of our students' behavioral plans. And so this is talking about perseverative requests, that he can sometimes get stuck on certain ideas and ask the same question over and over again. And this can be frustrating or confusing sometimes for a communication partner who's not familiar with them. And so we told them, if this happens, you can respond twice and then ignore me, or ignore problem behavior in general. Here's an example of a visual support token board with the students' rules and how they earn their tokens for following their rules. And then we also have an example of a student page when this student in particular had coping strategies, and he explained that, I can sometimes feel nervous about changes in my routine. My calming back has different things that I like, but I might need reminders to use these.
So hopefully seeing all those different examples from the different section kind of got your mind going about what strategies might help individuals that you know or that you work with. Next, we're going to talk about creating the This Is Me story with the individual with all of that information. So I like to use the completed This Is Me planning guide, like I said before. In my setting, I do typically create the story with the student on my iDevice and then transfer once it's complete, or our department iDevices, just because it's a little bit easier to keep track of what's been entered and what part is complete. And then once it is complete, sending it to the student's personal device. It's important to include a variety of settings and communication partners. So lots of different places and people that the student might be using these strategies with. And this is a great way to incorporate the individual's preferences when they're making the story. So I had a student that had really specific ideas about which teacher should be in the videos with her. Like, she really wanted her favorite teacher to be in the video with her. And then she also wanted the strategy scripts to be read by that favorite teacher. And it made her much more excited to pick up and share her story when she had choices about the content of it. Or if a student is showing a job site example, maybe they work at CVS and also work at a library, and for their work experience page, they want to share a video of themselves helping a customer or stocking shelves or something at CVS. And I know Kate touched on this, but we also want to provide opportunities to give input on the wording of scripts and the sections in the story. So, once the story is drafted and you start to actually work on the story with the individual, we had come up with a script for one of the students I was working with, and we read it together, and he kept pointing to a word and saying, I don't know what that means. Can we change it? So it was important that we, made the script and the information that the student was able to understand the content of their own story. And then finally, back it up. We can't stress this enough. We've lost a few really good ones over the years just with technology glitches and things that happen. So backing it up is just super important because it does take time to make them. I think you'll find over time, once you have the story complete, updating it isn't as difficult once the whole thing is complete, but that it's worth putting the time in to make the initial copy of the story. So there's also different language skills that may be involved if your individual is able to share the story with other people. That's not to say that if this isn't possible for them, that a caregiver can share it with somebody else, or basically we want the individual to participate in as much or as little of the process as they're able to. So as far as language skills, we might be targeting their body position with a communication partner, how close they are to somebody, their volume when sharing the information, actually navigating through the story for the electronic ones, making different comments related to the story, and answering questions. So this is just an example of a student sharing, or it's different parts of her story pieced together with her job site supervisor, and just kind of what this interaction looked like. And the first time she shared the story, she kept the story in front of her and, was playing each page, and you could hear all the strategies and hear the videos, but the supervisor couldn't actually see the information. So we wrote an IEP goal for her and worked on this in our therapy sessions. And then this is what it looked like at the end.
Can I show you my story? Yes.
tips help me learn what to say at work.
That is my job coach, Miss Saka, my job coach. She told me like I would do the A, B, C orders that the kids movies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening my story.
You're welcome.
So she did just a beautiful job of using the visuals to help her share more information about each page. They have some really just nice joint attention and rapport building going on with this interaction. And another kind of like sidebar with this supervisor, she did have a page about her favorite band in the story. And later on, he mentioned to us that once he knew that information, he actually played that for her one day when she was on the floor. And she was just so excited about it. And it really helped them kind of bond as like a supervisor and somebody working at this job site, and made her more excited to go to work when she kind of knew that her preferences and information about herself was known and honored and understood. And this was just another quote. I really like watching the students as they share the tool because you can see how proud they are. And I think watching that video, you can see how proud she felt about sharing that information with that supervisor. So as far as family involvement and support, the caregiver is likely the individual's strongest and most present advocate. So we always like to involve the caregiver from the initial development of the story, especially because we know once they leave us, there's not so much that we can help with and support with sharing this tool, but that their caregiver can. We also might have the individual or a caregiver share the story at their IEP meeting, at a new job site, with their transition supervisor or new staff working with the individual to kind of help them get to know that person. And then we also typically have some parent or caregiver training to support the individual using and sharing the story before they leave Ivymount. But Kate, do you want to talk a little bit about how you do that in your setting too?
Yeah, so I work in an inpatient hospitalization where the parents are not always present. Sometimes parents are out of state or across the country, and they're not able to come, on site as frequently. And so when I do this with my patients that I serve, I work closely with the students or patients interdisciplinary team. So their behavioral team, their education supports, and the medical providers and social work. And we create a draft of the story, and then I review that story with the caregivers and get their input. And so a lot of times, we're not familiar at the hospital setting with some of the things that go on in the home. For example, parents have said, oh, I want people to know that my child is really interested in dogs, but doesn't always know how to interact with dogs appropriately, which is, information we would not know in the hospital setting, but is very important when they go home to their neighborhood where there's lots of dogs. And so we then work to create the story together and make final modifications. And then once the story is complete, I typically screen record from Pictello, and then we airdrop it to the caregivers' phones or send it to their computers so they are able to go home and access it and share it with their neighbors, their family, and other providers.
And this was a quote from one of our graduates from Ivymount as well. And we talked to her after her son had graduated and moved on to adult service. And she had said, it's nice to know that as my son moves through adult services and gets to know new people, there's a way for them to use this tool to be more effective with him. And she also, not in this part of the quote, but had talked about how, she knew that he had a lot of paperwork that went with him, and she just felt like the new people he was working with probably didn't have time to read that. So it was nice that they had this snapshot of him to learn a little bit more. So I'm really briefly going to touch on our research because I do want to open the floor to questions and hear ideas from everybody attending. But here are just some of the research article citations for the work that we've been doing on This Is Me, because while we know there's research supporting transition skills and supporting transition, we want to make sure that our tool is doing what we say it is, as far as supporting individuals, sharing information, making sure there's social validity, and that all the stakeholders involved in this process are finding the creation and development of the tool valuable. And then this is just kind of a summary of our most recent study. It's all in the PDF of the slides. And then in the other resource document I shared, there is a page just kind of outlining all of the research that we've done. And then we are initiating a third research study with Kennedy Krieger. So Kate and I and our different teams are working together, which will be the largest sample size that we've had in a study, which is really exciting, and also working on, learning information about this tool with a different population of students and clients and staff. So our research questions are, first of all, conducting a content analysis of the different stories developed by Ivymount and KKI staff to understand how they meet the needs of different student profiles. So how one student might look different for another student or client story. And what strategies are included across the board in all of them, just to kind of get an idea of the characteristics, and then also evaluate the social validity of the stories by interviewing stakeholders about their reactions to them. So with all that being said, This Is Me stories can do the following. They hopefully provide an easy to use means of supporting transition across lots of different settings. That the process of sharing information during transitional periods is seamless and comprehensive. That they promote self-advocacy, and they improve the quality of communication by targeting partners, and they also take advantage of readily available tech options, and also just creating a really unique and wonderful picture of the individual that really represents them, and just how amazing they are and all of their strengths, and what, kind of the positive impact that they can have on working with different communication partners. So.
Dani and Kate, thank you so much, as always. Super excited for the audience that joined us today to have received the information. I know that when Natalie and myself from the Community Living Education Project first saw that This Is Me app really right in process was when Kate shared a story that CLEP shared a story of a young man that she was working with, who CLEP was also supporting as he was transitioning to a residential option out in the community. And Natalie and myself both immediately saw the benefits that the story had. Right, quite often we're reading about someone, and typically, right, a lot of reports are based on someone's challenges, right? And this really focused on someone's abilities and someone how to best support someone's likes and interests. So it really brought more of that right true person-centered approach to the table, and allowed further conversations, right? Not based on someone's challenges, but rather based on how do we keep someone happy and healthy. And our team automatically saw the benefits in that. So we will definitely be sharing these resources with other people that may be in similar situations and are looking to introduce someone to, whether that's a new residential provider or a new support team member of someone maybe who has self-directed employees, or a new employer, a new doctor, right? It really has endless benefits. Dani, I know that you use it within the school system, but when I looked at it, for my son who's in the adult system, I see, the possibilities again, right, are essentially endless the way that this app can be used. So for that, we thank you. And
Thank you for having us.
No,
Mhm.
absolutely. Absolutely. So I know we do have some questions. Are you finding, and it really sounds like, right, the approach to using this has to sort of be individualized. I had someone private message me, is this an app that the individual is to use, or is this an app that someone's support person or caregiver is to use? Can you both talk a little bit more about what that process looks like and how you would encourage participation from the individual if the support person would be the person to set this
Yeah.
up?
I can talk briefly because I think Dani has created a lot of IEP goals, like she discussed in the presentation, for how to include the student in the process. And a lot of times at Kennedy Krieger, our students have very severe cognitive needs, very severe language needs, and creating the story themselves is not always a possibility. And so when I am creating a story for a student, like I said, I involve the team. So we have an interdisciplinary approach to the creation of the story. I involve the caregiver so their voices are heard. And I typically include the student in showing them parts of their video. And so, to the aspect that we are able to, we create pictures of them. I take pictures of them during therapy or during their day and tell them this is going to be included in your story. We watch the story together once it's created. I usually try to have videos of them waving or some sort of gesture use for the outro of the story. We usually say thank you for watching and include a video of them waving or a video of them clapping, whatever we can get. And so that's how I include the individual. To their best of their abilities. I've also had students who are able to answer yes, no questions. I'll come in with some strategies and we'll say, does this support you? Yes or no? Do you like to work with a group? Yes or no? Do you like to work by yourself? Yes or no? And so we'll go through that together and include that in the story so they feel like they have a voice in it. But it's definitely individualized based on the person's needs, the person's abilities, and then the family and team's perspective as well.
And I think that's so important, right? You're really, the app is allowing, if someone does require support, to really meet that person where they're at in regards to how much support is going to be offered, right? If that's accepted by the individual who this is being based around. I think one of the things that really stood out also was the outline resource that you shared, where you're sort of outlining that story. I think that's a great space for individuals, maybe if they do need support to putting their "this is me" story together, but it's a great space for them to really make sure that things that are important to them are included in that story, right? So I always say, as a parent, it's easy for me to identify what my son needs in regards to support, but it's really easy for him to identify what he wants, which are two very different things, right?
Yes.
So I do love that. I love that you're also sharing those resources of the outline and helping guide individuals how to work through this process after you both have sort of done that trial and error, I'm sure.
Mel, can we clarify the app questions that are coming in?
Yes, can you
Yes, I
please?
was gonna say
Yes.
the same thing, Kate.
So This Is Me is a story concept. The planning guide is kind of the rough draft outline of the different modules, but the story is created in an application of your choice. So on the unit, I tend to use Pictello, which is, I think it's like $8 or $10 on the iTunes App Store.
It's a
Is
little
it
bit,
more?
it's a little bit more, it's more like 20, but
20.
during, I think, May and October, during Better Speech and Hearing Month and Assistive Technology Month, it's half off. So just good information
There's
to
the
have if you're
$10.
hoping to buy a lot of copies.
And so that's the story that's the application that we typically use. All the examples shown to you were created in the Pictello app, but it can also be done in Google Slides, in PowerPoint, in Word. You can import it into iMovie, the different applications on your computer or device, and then we screen record that typically to create the video. Or if you do it, through PowerPoint, you can then record your presentation and share it with others. So the "This Is Me" is just the concept,
Mhm,
and the application that you choose to use is whatever you're most comfortable with and what your program can purchase for you.
mhm.
And Danny and Kate, just to clarify, that's where they'll go to the Ivymount outreach to get the "This Is Me" app.
The
Is that
how-to
correct?
guide,
Okay.
the how-to guide, yes.
Yeah. The app, if you want to create the story through an app such as Pictello, you would just download the app of your choice through the iTunes Apple Store.
Mhm. And
Perfect.
unfortunately, Pictello is not available for Android devices, which is why we've kind of gotten creative with screen recording and Google Drive and PowerPoint, just so that individuals with access only to Android can still benefit from the tool itself.
Perfect. And I do just want to say out loud, Barbara, if you saw my message to me, if you want to be unmuted to ask your question, please let me know. And then if you just want to type in your question, we could also get to it that way, whatever you're most comfortable with. And then I think one of the other things that really stood out is that this is something that someone can use, right, really across the lifespan, right? Even though it was intended, right, or formed for individuals within the school system, right, the benefits essentially are going to grow with that person, and it may possibly need to, their story can possibly be adjusted depending on who it's being shared with, and the content maybe, right, that would be relevant to that new person in someone's life, or the new location that that person's transitioning to, whether it's school to adult life services, right, or one job to another, a family home to a home in a community, right, whether that's a person's own home with support staff or possibly into a group home. Again, it sort of really seems endless, the possibilities that someone could use this app for. But I think CLEP really saw the value in the person-centered approach that this takes, and we felt it was important to really be able to share the information that the two of you were able to put together. So definitely appreciate that. I just want to make sure that we got to all the questions. Hey, can I ask you just to share one more time the link, if you could, any of the resources? I want to make sure that everyone's able, there we go, just to copy and paste that. Kate and Dani both shared some of the resources previously with me, so I will make sure to attach that to any additional follow-up emails that you're going to get. It should be 24 to 48 hours. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out. You can reach out to me. I can forward those questions to Dani and Kate. Dani and Kate, do you have contacts that you're comfortable sharing?
Yes.
Would you? Perfect. So if you want to drop those in the chat section also, please feel free. I am going to quickly put the CLEP contacts in that chat section. Natalie, if you're still on, please put your email on also, and the rest of the CLEP team. Please feel free to do that in the chat section in case someone has any follow-up questions in regards to community living options or resources. The Community Living Education Project through Rutgers University is here to provide any resources and support as your family is preparing to explore residential or community living options. So, okay, so perfect. So I'm going to give everyone a minute to really look through the chat section and be able to just copy, paste, download any links that you're interested in having saved. Again, I'm going to also be including those in the outreach, along with a recording of today's information session. And we thank everyone for joining us. Dani, Kate, can't thank you enough. It's been more than a pleasure to work with you both, and Kate, to work with you again. And if anyone has any follow-up questions, we would be more than happy to help address. So thank you very much, everyone. Now, and I am going to activate a post survey. So as everyone's signing off today, you're going to see a quick survey pop up on your screen. That's going to take maybe 20 seconds just to complete it. If you would participate, it's information that you provide to us that really allows us to plan for future sessions. So again, that'll pop up as we're disconnecting. So thank you, everyone. Be well.